Hello, everybody, and welcome to Universal Basic Podcast with Chris Proia. And I am your co host, Dr. Cindy Banyai, here to make sure that you have an amazing experience listening to this working class hero in Florida talk about all of the things that are important to you, especially concerning economics, workforce.
As
We
I'm
look
sure
forward to
you
hearing
know,
that.
income inequality basically refers to the unequal distribution of income among individuals or households within a population. High levels of income inequality will have various negative effects on society, including reduced social mobility, increased poverty, decreased levels of economic growth. It'll also exacerbate like social and political tensions today going on, and it leads to greater disparities in health outcomes, education, access to opportunities. Basically, the rich will get richer, the poor stay poorer, and it's not a good look for what's supposed to be the leader of the free world in the first world.
Yeah, and I know that from my background in international relations, we look at income inequality as a measure of stability going along the lines of the Gini coefficient. Are you going to get into that?
I did do a little bit of looking into the Gini coefficient. Basically, that goes into it's measured from anywhere between 0 and 1, but it's usually read off as a percentage point. And most of the free world, most of Europe and all the countries that they say look up to America, they're all in the low numbers, like 20, maybe 30% of a Gini coefficient, where the US is at about 41 or 42,
Hmm.
working in the middle of the country list. And then the worst will be like bad places in Africa and whatnot, they'll be like 60% of income inequality.
Right.
Basically, one guy owns all the wealth, and
Yeah.
everybody else is just left to feed for scraps. Yeah,
Yeah. And that's exactly how that works. So when the social scientists like me are looking to measure income inequality, that's what they use. So they use the Gini coefficient, and it is basically like Chris said, it's perfect equality as everyone has the same amount of money, and perfect inequality is one person has all the money. And
yeah,
it's measurement between that, between those two extremes. And the lower it is, the better, the smaller the range between top and bottom, essentially. And
mhm,
as those numbers get closer to one, you are having an increasingly small amount of people with an increasingly larger a slice of the economic pie. And this has historically caused all the problems that Chris just talked about. And so social scientists look at that because it's really important to track. So this is not just about, hey, who's rich and who's poor, but if you have a small concentrated amount of wealth and a large population without access to wealth, then you're going to have problems. And
yeah,
as I hear a lot of Republican folks, they like to talk about to explain this to people, they say things like job creators, right? We have to take care of the job creators. We're going to
yeah,
have tax cuts for the job creators. And then this goes all the way back to trickle down economics, right? Which was the deregulation of starting in the Reagan era in the 80s,
right.
where they started to take away some of those protections that had actually reduced income inequality from the beginning of the 1900s through the 1970s. And since the Reagan trickle down era and this Republican emphasis on job creators, we have seen a growing income disparity since that time.
Definitely. Supporters of tax cuts will argue that they can stimulate economic growth by encouraging businesses, investment, and consumer spending through tax cuts. And they believe lower tax rates will lead to higher levels of consumption and investment. But what we actually see is basically the cup for the rich just gets bigger and bigger,
Right.
and none of it actually trickles down. That's
Because
basically what happens with
what
tax
we've
cuts like
learned
that.
Exactly. What we've learned through the tax cuts, and now we know that there were tax cuts under Reagan, there were tax cuts under Bush, W. Bush, George
W.
W.
Bush,
Bush,
yeah.
as well as the huge tax cut under Trump. What we've
Hmm.
learned through that is when you give tax cuts to the wealthy, they do not increase their spending. And so actually it's a
No.
totally false premise that they're working on. When you give tax cuts to the wealthy, they put that money into investments in the stock market that will give them residual income, but not actually facilitate economic growth because it's
Right.
not part of the consumer economy. It actually takes that money completely out of the economic cycle that we've talked about when you are putting stimulus into the economy, for example. So,
Right.
like almost to a certain extent, tax cuts are the opposite of stimulus. And tax cuts, especially when they go up to the wealthy, leave nothing. They take that money out of the economy. So it's not going to the server at the restaurant. It's not going to the retail employee who sold them an item. They're not spending money because part of that has to do with the fact that this trickle down economic bullshit has worked so well. That income and inequality has grown so much. That top wealthy portion of Americans, they can't spend their money fast enough. They can't like
Right.
there's nothing more interesting for them anymore. This is one of the reasons why Jeff Bezos is going to the moon, right? And going to outer space is because shit, what else do I spend my billions of dollars on? I might as well go to space.